Picture this. You're a 14-year-old girl in the Tangut Kingdom, swaddled in silk your mother wove herself, the threads still smelling faintly of the dye vats. The spring air is thick with the perfume of apricot blossoms and the damp breath of the earth after rain. From the palace's high walls, you watch caravans snake through the distant mountain pass, bright banners snapping in the wind, the jangle of camel bells floating faintly on the breeze. Your father says the traders will bring prosperity. Your mother hums as she braids your hair, each tug grounding you in a world that feels unshakably safe. Then the ground begins to tremble, not from thunder, not from an earthquake, from thousands of hooves pounding in unison as if the earth itself has grown a heartbeat. Dust rises on the horizon like a second dawn, dimming the sun. The guards stiffen on the battlements. The air changes, sharp, metallic, smelling faintly of iron and sweat. You don't yet know what it means, but the women around you fall silent. The Mongols have come. They do not set fire to the palace. They do not storm the treasury. They move like a tide with a single purpose. The women. All of them. From noble ladies to kitchen servants, dragged from corridors, gardens, and kitchens, herded into the main courtyard like cattle penned for slaughter. The air fills with the sound of weeping and the rustle of silk against stone. You're forced to strip, the cold biting into your skin, while men with expressionless faces walk the rows. They speak in a language you don't understand, but the gestures are universal. A hand lifting a chin, fingers tracing a jawline, heads nodding or shaking. Scrolls are unrolled, marks are made. This is no chaos. This is a selection, a ranking. One man holds up a wooden tally board, and though you can't read the symbols, you understand instinctively, this number is your fate. The curve of your cheekbone might mean life in a guarded tent or a slow death somewhere far away. That's the day you learn the truth. Genghis Khan doesn't conquer only with the sword. He conquers with the bodies of the conquered, and you will be taken to his camp tonight along with dozens of others. You will not come back the same person. Because here, your body is no longer yours. It belongs to the man building the most terrifying machine of sexual domination the world has ever seen. Before we step into that machine, let's rewind. Because before he became Genghis Khan, he was still Temujin, a young man with a bride chosen not for politics but for love. Her name was Börte. In the traditions of the steppe, their wedding tent was sacred ground, the birthplace of a new household, a woven vow between two clans. But one night, that tent became a crime scene. The Merkit tribe, enemies of Temujin's father, attacked under cover of darkness. They overpowered his guards, bound him, and dragged Börte away into the blackness. She was gone for 8 long months. When Temujin finally ransomed her back, she was pregnant. The boy she bore, Yochi, was a question carved into flesh. Was he Temujin's son or the child of her captor? On the steppe, paternity was more than a family matter. It was the spine of honor, legitimacy, and inheritance. That uncertainty was a wound Temujin could never close. And wounds have a way of festering. He learned that losing a woman meant losing face, that humiliation demanded repayment, not just in blood, but in flesh. Börte's abduction became the blueprint. What had happened to her he would now multiply across entire nations. To turn one woman's suffering into a system, he needed more than rage. He needed policy. And in the wars to come, Genghis Khan would ensure that sexual violence wasn't just a byproduct of conquest. It was the point. When most armies in history took women during war, it was chaos, the spoils of soldiers drunk on victory, uncoordinated, unplanned. But Temujin, now transforming into Genghis Khan, saw what happened to Börte not as an isolated crime, but as a lesson in control. In the Mongol mind, to possess the women of a rival was to possess its future. A wife was more than a partner. She was a bearer of lineage, the vessel of her people's blood. And on the vast steppes, lineage was power. The humiliation of having your women taken was a scar that outlived the battle, a reminder to all who survived that your tribe had been broken from the inside out. Genghis Khan took that humiliation, his humiliation, and carved it into a weapon. From then on, when the Mongols rode into a new land, sexual violation was no longer an accident of war. It was a signal, a deliberate act ordered from the top, a stamp of dominance. If a tribe surrendered quickly, Their men might be spared, for a time. If they resisted, death was certain for the men, but survival for the women. Survival of a different kind. They were taken alive, not for ransom, but for ritualized degradation. This was not the chaos of undisciplined plunder. It was policy. The message was sharp as any arrow. Your bodies are mine, and your bloodline ends here. The chronicles, both Mongol and foreign, tell it plainly. Daughters of chiefs, widows of fallen warriors, even girls who had not yet reached childbearing age, none were exempt. To be raped by the Khan or his chosen men was not just an act of violence, it was a ceremony of ownership, a mark burned not onto the skin, but into a people's memory. And Genghis Khan understood something most rulers missed. A sword can kill a man, but only the womb can erase a people. By placing Mongol seed into foreign women, he was planting his lineage inside the enemy, ensuring that no pure line of that tribe would survive another generation. This was more than cruelty. It was genocide in slow motion, a weapon that outlasted battles, sieges, even the Khan's own life. But even a weapon like this could be sharpened. The Mongols were masters of efficiency, from military formations to postal networks, and in Genghis Khan's mind, there was no reason women should not also be organized, cataloged, and assigned with the same precision as horses or weapons. That's when he began to build something the world had never seen before, a 100-point system for human bodies. It wasn't lust, it was logistics. Genghis Khan understood that even in atrocity, disorder was wasteful. Chaos squandered resources, efficiency extended power. If sexual domination was to be a weapon, it had to be measured, sorted, and distributed with the same discipline as grain or arrows. So he created the 100-point system, a cold, bureaucratic scoreboard for human beings. Every captured woman, from princess to shepherd girl, was examined. Her virginity was noted, her facial symmetry judged, the smoothness of her skin, the length and thickness of her hair, even her ancestry, all became variables in a formula. The evaluation was carried out by trusted officers or eunuchs, men whose job was not pleasure, but categorization. Numbers were recorded on wax tablets or scrolls, a single mark deciding a woman's entire fate. Those who scored 90 points or more were absorbed into the Khan's personal harem, a guarded, opulent prison. They lived in felt palaces, draped in silk, served delicacies brought from conquered lands, but they belonged entirely to him, as possessions, not people. Scores between 70 and 89 were given as gifts to generals, governors, or foreign envoys. These women became living tokens of loyalty, bargaining chips in the web of Mongol diplomacy. Scores below 60 were sent to the Ordu brothels, grueling rotations serving common soldiers, sometimes dozens in a single day. Life expectancy here could be measured in months. This was merciless arithmetic. A soldier's wife might be spared the worst because she scored a 72. Another woman, with a score of 58, might be worked to death before the season turned. The system stripped away the pretense of romance or impulse. This was not about who caught the Khan's eye. It was about control. It was about turning desire into data and data into domination. Like any supply chain, this ranking system needed a distribution network, one that could move human cargo as efficiently as it moved horses and weapons. And the Mongols, masters of movement, already had the perfect skeleton for such a system. It was called the Yam, a relay network that could stretch an empire across continents, and soon it would carry more than just messages. The Yam was the pride of the Mongol Empire, a chain of relay stations stretching across thousands of miles. Originally, it was built for speed. Messengers could ride hard for a day, reach a station, swap their exhausted horse for a fresh one, and be back on the road within minutes. Information that took weeks in other empires could travel in days under the Khan. But when Genghis Khan looked at the Yam, he saw more than a postal service. He saw a conveyor belt. The same system that ferried messages and supplies could just as easily transport women. And so, alongside the stables and barracks, the Mongols began building comfort houses, state-run brothels, stocked with the captives classified under the 100-point system. Placement was strategic. High-ranked women stayed near the capital or in elite garrisons, serving officers and envoys. Lower-ranked women were pushed toward the frontiers, cycled through remote outposts where soldiers rotated as often as the horses. Persian chroniclers and Chinese annals paint a chilling picture. Over 50,000 women passed through this network during the height of the empire. Their movements were logged with military precision, the number of uses they endured, their menstrual cycles, pregnancies, even the date of their deaths. At some stations, there were quotas, as if the women were arrowheads or sacks of grain. Failure to meet them meant punishment for the overseers and often for the women themselves. The Mongols didn't just conquer land, they conquered distance. And for a captive woman, distance was both a prison and a sentence. One day she might be in the shadow of Karakoram serving the Khan's circle. The next month she could be shuttled to the icy frontiers to serve men whose names she'd never know, until she was deemed too sick, too weak, or too old to be worth moving. This was sexual exploitation on an industrial scale, the same logistical brilliance that could move an army from the steppes to the gates of Baghdad, now applied to the most intimate form of violence. And beneath all this organization was a deeper aim, not just to use these women, but to alter the blood of nations. Because in Genghis Khan's vision, the womb was a battlefield, and the children born from it were his truest conquests. For Genghis Khan, victory wasn't only measured in fortresses taken or cities burned to ash. It was measured in what, and who, remained after the dust settled, and in many conquered lands, the pattern was the same. First, the men of fighting age were executed. Those who might one day avenge their fathers, the older boys, were often killed as well. Only the women and the very young children were left alive. But their survival was never a mercy. It was a repurposing. These women were not only to serve as spoils, they were to be re-engineered into wombs for the empire. Mongol soldiers, under strict orders, impregnated them. The goal was not random, it was replacement. The next generation, born from these unions, would be Mongol in blood and loyalty. The native male lines would vanish in a single generation without another arrow loosed. Modern genetics has confirmed the scope of this policy. Around 1 in every 200 men alive today, roughly 16 million individuals, carries a Y chromosome that can be traced directly back to Genghis Khan. This isn't the genetic footprint of chance encounters or scattered romance. It's the residue of a deliberate, systematic breeding campaign carried out across continents. For the women, there was no after. Their children were raised as Mongols, speaking Mongol tongues, practicing Mongol customs, and in some cases, those sons were sent to war, sometimes against the very villages where their mothers were born. It was biological warfare without siege engines or catapults, a way to redraw the human map without touching the borders. Every womb taken was a border crossed. Every child born was a conquest that would never appear in the chronicles as a battle. And yet, within this vast machinery of domination, there were still those who refused to be only numbers or bodies or vessels. One of them, a woman known as Gerbil, would take her place in the Khan's own tent, and she would not enter it as a victim. She would enter with a dagger. The Tangut kingdom had resisted the Mongols for years, holding its ground against an enemy that seemed impossible to stop. But in the end, resistance only delayed the inevitable. When the kingdom fell, its royal household was destroyed, every man executed, every woman claimed as spoils. Among them was Princess Gerbil. Her beauty, her noble blood, and her youth earned her an almost perfect score in the Khan's ranking system, a 98-pointer. That number sealed her fate. She would not be scattered to some distant frontier. She would be placed in the Khan's personal harem, the innermost circle of power and control. To the outside world, this was considered the highest form of survival. Life inside the Khan's felt palaces meant silk robes, fine food, protection from the brutality of soldiers. But Gerbil understood what it really was, a more gilded form of captivity. For 3 years, she played the role expected of her. She learned the Mongol tongue, not just to obey, but to eavesdrop. She memorized the rotations of the guards, the times when the corridors were least patrolled, the patterns of the women who attended the Khan. She became a shadow within the Khan's court, unseen except when summoned. Her chance came from an unlikely source, an older concubine, worn down by years of service, who passed her a small object during a communal bath. It was a dagger, slender enough to hide in hair, its blade blackened so it wouldn't catch the torchlight. It had been passed between women before, each one too afraid or too closely watched to use it. Gerbil kept it hidden, waiting. And then, on a night when the wind howled across the steppe and the Khan sent for her alone, she decided the waiting was over. She wound her hair high, securing the dagger within with pins, and walked through the cold toward the great felt tent. The guards let her through without question. Inside, the air was heavy with the sense of horsehide, sweat, and pine resin from burning torches. The Khan sat on a low couch draped in sable fur, a bowl of fermented mare's milk in his hand. He motioned her closer. She moved slowly, gracefully, every step measured, the pins pressed cold against her scalp, the dagger a secret weight above her crown. When she knelt, he reached for her face. That was her moment. With one fluid motion, she pulled the blade free and drove it down, not into his chest, but into his groin. The Khan's roar was swallowed by the storm outside. Blood spread quickly across the furs, dark and glistening. He reached for a weapon that wasn't there, but she leaned in close enough for him to hear her whisper, "For Tangut." By morning, the Khan's tent was sealed. His body was carried out in silence. The official records would claim he died of illness during the campaign. But in the secret network of the empire's enslaved women, the truth traveled faster than any rider of the Yam. A princess had walked into the Khan's tent, and he had never walked out. In the Mongol court, history wasn't simply recorded, it was engineered. Chroniclers wrote what the Khan's heirs wanted remembered, and what they wanted forgotten was buried deep. Official scrolls stated that Genghis Khan had fallen ill on campaign, dying quietly in his tent. There was no mention of Gerbil, no mention of a dagger hidden in her hair, no whisper of a wound that no warrior could survive. But outside those guarded archives, the story lived. In the dim corners of comfort houses along the Yam, women passed it from mouth to mouth. They spoke of the Tangut princess who entered the Khan's tent alone, of the blade blackened so it would not shine, of the blood that soaked sable fur in the flicker of torchlight. They told it in the hush of shared baths, in the low murmur of night, until it became less a story and more a talisman, proof that even the most feared man in the world could bleed. The Mongol elite feared the legend. They tried to snuff it out by scattering survivors, burning harem records, punishing anyone caught telling forbidden tales. But legends are stubborn things. They slip past the guards, hiding in lullabies, in whispers between captives, in the knowing glance of a woman who has heard the name Gerbil before. And while the empire continued, the ranking systems, the comfort houses, the quotas, something had changed. The machine was no longer untouchable. Somewhere, in some harem or outpost, every man in power now knew a woman's hand could end even the great Khan. Today, scientists don't need scrolls to confirm the past. They read it in the double helix of DNA. Across vast stretches of Asia, from Mongolia's open steppes to the plains of Persia, a single Y chromosome signature repeats again and again. It belongs to Genghis Khan. Roughly 16 million living men carry it, 1 in every 200 on Earth. This isn't the footprint of romance, it's the genetic scar of an empire that used reproduction as conquest, intimacy as war. Every marker in that DNA chain is a reminder of a woman who had no choice, of a child born to erase a people's bloodline. And the cultural scars remain too. In many regions once under Mongol rule, traditions of female seclusion, obsessions with virginity, and rigid male dominance trace back to these centuries of enforced control. Anthropologists call it the genetic and cultural scar, a shadow of conquest that outlives the conqueror. Genghis Khan's empire fractured long ago, but its most enduring monument isn't a ruin or a border. It walks the earth in living bodies, millions of them, and all of it began with the theft of a single bride from a wedding tent. The Khan believed women were the map on which he could draw his empire, measured, traded, bred into submission. But in the end, it wasn't an army or a rival ruler who stopped him. It was one woman who refused to be a line on his ledger. Gerbil's name never made it into the official histories, but every time her story was whispered in the dark, every time the words "for Tangut" were breathed between women, the blade lived again, We don't choose the past, but we can choose how to tell it. And sometimes, telling it truthfully is the sharpest blade of all. Because if an empire of war and rape could be wounded by one hidden dagger, then maybe, just maybe, a story can finish the work she started.